334 Oxford Street was a highlight project from 2025, which we completed alongside Tilbury Contracts.
This facade is stunning. I mean, I love these photos that we've got here, but even just down to the detailing around, the small cuts into these facade panels, the pavers just run slightly underneath, which I guess helps with that installation.
Yes, but it was working with Tilbury at the design stage to ensure that those small cuts at those points were fully supported as well. Overall, the project went very, very well.
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest challenges we mentioned is the wind uplift, which is obviously a key concern. As a terrace, you've got fairly basic geometry. You've got a straight run of paving. The tile sizing that was being used was a 600 by 1200 porcelain tile. So we had to carry out the wind uplift calculations, understand what the actual forces of wind uplift and the negative pressures were on the building. And then that gave us then the ability to mitigate that accordingly. And the way that this was designed in was using the TerraSmart Rail hidden wind uplift system, which means that the tiles actually get a rebate or a kerf, as it's referred to, put into the side of the tile, and then they are mechanically restrained back down to the lattice structure of the TerraSmart Rail system. The terraces actually wrap nicely around the sides of the buildings, don't they? Which is where the length of the paver is running parallel to the main facade. So as you wrap around the corner, you're ultimately changing direction of paving. And the installation by Tilbury here is really, really nice. The lattice structure of the rails gave that flexibility of actually being able to rotate the paving without having to rotate the support structure beneath, because the top rail could actually run down this diagonal here at an angle across those lower joists, which gives that flexibility of support. And then we've got this, it's actually for a man-safe system for the davit arm. So we had davit arm access, rainwater outlet access that needed to be overcome, all for the facade maintenance, which obviously, as you can imagine, over the front edge of these roof terraces was quite an interesting detail, but the height of the davit arm socket beneath the actual underside of the paver was very, very tight.
Yeah.
And so having the flexibility as well of the lattice frame meant that where a davit arm socket came up below the tile, if it was to clash in theory with a rail, you could actually adjust the rail spacing and spans to overcome those complex details, which is where it came into its own, as well as obviously the wind uplift being a key driver of that. One of the things that could have easily got overlooked on the project was the maintenance of the davit arm socket. So when a davit arm is put in, you then have to test it on an annual basis. I think it might be biannually, to make sure it's obviously maintained its loading capability. And in doing that, they're putting down around 12 kilonewtons of force onto the paving system, which for a pedestrian space like this, your standard design is around 4 kilonewtons a square metre. So there was additional calculations and checks that we had to do to make sure that we were managing the maintenance side of the long term of the project as well.
So Tilbury, long-standing partner of Ryno, we worked with them early stages before any orders were placed, so at design stage, to essentially optimise the system. It meant that when they got onto site, a lot of these details had already been thrashed out, and so the install went pretty smoothly. Given it was a fairly complex project in that sense. Worked with Tilbury a lot, got a good working relationship with them, and so when questions came up on site, we were able to deal with them very quickly.
Yeah. A particular challenge came up around getting access to certain parts of the davit arms, removal of the tiles with wind uplift fixings, that kind of thing. That staged checking of, on-site support means that the contractor's got that confidence that they've got that backup if they ever need it as well, haven't they?
Yeah.
I'm Ollie. I'm a contracts manager for Tilbury Contracts. We worked with Ryno on this project. Underneath a lot of the paving of this project, we had davit systems and abseil points. Now, it was part of the architect and the client spec, but they didn't want to see these davits on show, so all this had to be hidden below our paving line, which meant that a lot of these tiles that we install had to be removable. So we had to come up with a way around it where we use two-way spacers and we're able to slide them within inside Ryno's rail system and make it simple for in an O&M manual for it to be handed over to a client and then for somebody to do it who is not a specialist contractor like ourselves. It's a very established building right down the centre of Oxford Street. It will be right in people's eye line as soon as you come out of Bond Street Station, so it's something that a lot of people can see and look at. We had some really nice high-spec porcelain tiles, which Ryno supplied for us. All the paving is locked in solidly. Demarcation studs were installed to the surfaces underneath. I'd like to sign off by saying big thank you to Ryno for the help and support throughout this project. I know Scott and Calvin have been involved with our design teams years before we actually began this project in construction phase. It's been a great project to work on, and we look forward to working with Ryno again in the future on other ones.